So the formal name of the program is From Capture to Print, The Art of Black and White Photography. There's my website, just lewiskatzphotography.com. At the time that I went and was looking for a web address, my name was still available, which I was thrilled. And there's my email address, which is olympus21209@yahoo.com. And that's a combination of the camera brand that I mostly shoot and my zip code plus Yahoo. Please feel free to be in touch with me with any questions or any other clarifications that you may have through my email address. I've also given to Jeff a Word document that he will distribute, which sort of recaps the program that we're going to go through tonight. And I also forwarded him a link to a SurveyMonkey survey. I always do a survey after I do a presentation, because it's the way that I get feedback from my audience, and I do take it seriously. So I really appreciate it if you just take a couple of minutes. It's only like 5 or 6 questions. Whenever Jeff, gets it to you, whether it's later tonight or tomorrow, just take a couple of minutes and fill it out and just shoot it back. It's all anonymous. I don't know who's who. So, other than the club, that it's coming from. Okay. So what we're first going to do tonight is look at some black and white work from some iconic photographers that had a lot of influence on me as I really dove a little deeper into my love of black and white photography. We're going to do that before we start looking at my work. Please also feel free. We have a very small group here, which is great, because we can make this more informal. And I mean that, by that I mean, please feel free to stop at any point and ask any questions you might have. I will definitely stop once or twice to ask for questions, but if something just pops into your mind, please don't be afraid to just hit your space bar, and that'll unmute you and just ask any question that comes to mind, because sometimes it's easy. You forget a question that you may have had like 15 minutes ago. So I wanted to point that out. I can do that with these small groups. With a large group, it becomes too unwieldy to do that. So let's just jump right in. Ansel Adams, I think, a black and white photographer that we're all very, very familiar with. Let me just get rid of this. He has a lot of great quotes. He has a lot of great pictures. The quote that I resonate with the most is this one: "A great photograph is one that truly expresses what one feels in the deepest sense about what is being photographed." And the reason why this is so important to me, and my favorite quote, is because you're going to hear a lot from me tonight about feelings and emotion, and why I think black and white photography is better at expressing that than color photography is. And so that's why this particular quote always resonated with me. So when you look at an image like this from Ansel, Ansel Adams didn't have many people or animals in his photographs. However, I feel that when you're looking at one of his iconic images like this one, and not every image that Ansel Adams, created was a masterpiece, but when you're looking at one of his masterpieces like this one, I actually can viscerally feel the connection that Ansel Adams has with the landscape. And I think that's what makes him such a great photographer. If you're able to create that emotional connection without even the use of people or animals, that even puts you, in my mind, on a higher level, because to be able to do that with just the pure landscape is really even more difficult. And you'll hear more about that as we go into this. But so another photographer who no one knew about until fairly recently, because nobody knew about this woman because her negatives were auctioned off, and until her negatives were auctioned off, nobody knew about Vivian Maier. And I hope a lot of you have heard of Vivian Maier, but Vivian Maier was a nanny by profession, but was really one of the better street photographers. And it was really kind of a shame that nobody knew about her work until she passed away. And now, of course, a lot of books have been published and you can buy prints, and she's really become a much bigger name right now. And to me, what makes a really great black and white image is the combination of a great graphic context. And by that I mean, in this case, it's that stone wall going on the right hand side sort of to infinity, and on the left side you have the repetition of the benches. And then on the bottom, you have the reflections of the branches. And then, of course, you have the shadows of the people. But to me, it's the people in a lot of wonderful black and white images that make them so emotional and make them so powerful. I'm assuming that this is one of the families that she was nannying for. And I think that's the dad and two young kids. The kids are on roller skates. And she, the young woman just turned around, right at the moment that Vivian Maier hit the shutter. So if you haven't really heard about her, or you don't know much about her work, I really urge you to go and look at books by Vivian Maier, because her work was really, really outstanding. Henri Cartier-Bresson, another wonderful and another one of my favorite black and white photographers. He lived long enough to know all about color photography. He passed away in 2006. He really didn't like color photography. He was quoted as once saying that he despised it. And this is an image of his that I particularly love. Again, it's the combination of a graphic context, which is that the wet pavement, the staircase going off to the left, the implied stairs going down to the right, because that gentleman isn't going to just fall off the earth when he reaches the end of that line. And this image would be very powerful, even without the people and without the cat. But again, when you have people and animals within an image, it adds sort of a vulnerability to an image. It takes it purely out of the graphic context and it makes it something more. And what I would stipulate in this particular case is it's the cat that makes this picture. It's even more so than the people, because cats represent something very mysterious. They have a very cool vibe about them. And so they add an aura of sort of mystery on the one hand and sophistication on the other hand. So to me, the cat really makes this picture as great as it is. Margaret Bourke-White ended up working for the government in World War II. One of the things you always need, no matter what kind of photography you're working in, is a vantage point. And this is a perfect example. Margaret Bourke-White had a perfect vantage point because she's looking down onto the floor of the silk mill from a balcony, I'm assuming. And this is a absolutely gorgeous black and white image. I mean, the range and tonality, the repetitive shapes, it's just, without the people in it, this would still be an extraordinarily well done and powerful black and white image. But again, for me, it's the people. It's the random placement of the people through this frame that make this such a strong image. Now, when this image was taken, which was probably like in the late 40s, you're left to wonder, like, how many hours per day did these people stand on their feet and work at the silk mill? How many days a week? They probably worked 6 days a week, 10 hours a day. And so when you think of it in that way, that puts a whole new tone onto the image. It's not just an image of a silk mill, it's an image of the workers at the silk mill, and what that adds to it emotionally is really quite powerful. And without the people, you wouldn't get that feeling, from the image. And again, as I said, I'm all about feeling. I'm all about the ability of the photographer to create a composition that he or she has an emotional connection to, And the emotional connection that the photographer has is so paramount with the subject matter, because that's what's going to translate to the viewer. You know, the stronger the emotional connection is that the photographer has, the more time the viewer will spend looking at your work, because that feeling will actually translate through the photograph and into the viewer. And I think that's why it's the emotional aspect of black and white is so important to me. Leonard Farkas, again, a perfect example. Without the dancer, this would still be a very nice image, beautiful shadows, but it's the placement of the dancer right at the beginning of that column of light with the long curved shadow and the bodily expression that the dancer has, in contrast to what the rest of the image looks like, which is very, very graphic and just very, symmetrical. And the dancer throws that completely off because of the placement and the pose and the curves. So again, it's another just good example of how a person changes how an image feels to the viewer. Dorothea Lange, absolutely one of my favorites. She wore her heart right on her sleeves. Here's a young girl in a very humble abode staring into a fireplace, you know, and you're just left to wonder, what is she thinking? Is she thinking, are we going to have any food tonight? Are we going to have any wood to make a fire? And that's what Dorothea Lange wants you to think about. She wants you to think about what's going on in that young girl's head. And I love the way the light is coming from behind her, and it puts her face in a deep shadow, which just adds to the emotional, you know, power of the image. And here's an example where I really have no idea what color the walls of this very humble abode are. But whatever color they are or they were, they would absolutely distract you from what Dorothea Lange wants you to look at. And what she wants you to look at is the young girl and her face. And what Dorothea wants you to think about is, what is that young girl thinking about? What is going through her mind? And to me, that's what makes this kind of image, again, such a powerful, you know, black and white image. This is one of my favorites by Leonard Freed. I am a cat person, as you can tell already. I like this image even without the cats, just like the Bresson image. It's got really nice symmetrical repetitive patterns, so it's got a really nice graphic context going on. It's got really nice light, but what absolutely makes this image are these two cats. If you're familiar with cat body language, you know that the one approaching from the distance is absolutely friendly, curious, you know, wanting to know what's going on with the other cat, whereas the cat in the foreground is exactly the opposite, tail down, really nervous about what's going to happen. And so what makes this photograph is that in the next few seconds, you just know that something really interesting is going to happen, you know, between these two cats, and we don't know what happened. And that's what makes the photograph so powerful, is that it implies something, but we don't really have the answer, you know, to the question. And I just, these cats just add so much to this particular image. Robert Frank, very famous for a book called The Americans. If you could find a used copy, I would strongly suggest picking it up. A decent used copy usually runs about $50 these days if you can find one. It's out of print. And what he tasked himself to do was to photograph America and the Americans. And what better photograph than this of a streetcar going by with everybody framed in their window frames. And look at the diversity of age, the diversity of ethnicity, the diversity of the expressions in their face. I even like the sort of psychedelic looking reflections that he got off the glass above, which is above the window frame. And again, it doesn't matter what color that streetcar was or is, whether it's green or brown or whatever. because whatever color it is, it would absolutely distract you from what he wants you to look at. And what he wants you to look at are all these people's faces. And I think he did just an incredible job in capturing this this street photograph. A very famous Chinese photographer named Fan Ho. One of the things I said a little while ago was one of the things you need is a vantage point. Well, he certainly found a great vantage point because he's looking down from above and he's looking at a scene which is being created by either a fence or a building that's creating those long lines of shadow. And the other thing you need as a photographer is patience, because I think he waited until he got every column filled with a person. And so as you look at this image, every column has a person in it with a beautiful long shadow. These people have no relation to each other. You have no idea where they're going, what they're thinking. And that's what makes these kinds of photographs so powerful, is that they bring up such a plethora of different emotions. And again, whatever color the ground is, it really is totally superfluous. It doesn't matter. And it probably, again, would distract you from what the photographer wants you to look at, which is basically all these figures, you know, in their individual columns. All right, so now let's talk a little more about emotion and black and white and color. Yes, yes. Question?
Okay, so the black and white, I agree, it's great at showing kind of the dark, moody, rainy emotions. But color is what tends to add the joy emotions. I haven't seen any of those pictures that were joyous.
That's exactly correct. And I happen to think that black and white, as this chart kind of shows you, I think black and white for the most part is associated with, for the most part, more negative emotions than positive emotions, and color is more associated with more positive emotions than negative emotions. Look at this chart and you can see that these are the emotions that we are raised to react to. And so the question I was going to ask is, imagine trying to create a very, very sad picture, but only using yellow tones. That would be very, very difficult to do because of how we associate yellow with those different qualities. And I think we are raised and we are brought up in our society to make these associations without us even thinking. We just make these associations because of, you know, how we're raised from, you know, from a young infant to a person. Why I like this chart is it also included the emotions that we associate with black, gray, and white. And you can take any three, you can pick any one emotion from black, gray, and white and combine them in your head, and you can start imagining a wonderful kind of image. So you can take like mystery from black and authority from gray, and, you know, maybe something like coolness from white, and think about it, a Cary Grant leaning up against a wall, you know, as a detective. And when people ask me who else has really influenced me in my photography, I always mention the great film directors of our time, people like Hitchcock and Orson Welles. They knew everything that I'm telling you tonight. That's why they shot so much of their films in black and white. Even once color became de rigueur in the film industry, for the most part, although Hitchcock made a few color films toward the end of his career, he did almost all of his films in black and white because he realized that black and white had a certain emotional quality to it that his films required, and that if he tried to do them in color, these emotions that we associate with all these other colors, they actually would get in the way of what he was trying to say in his film. And if you go back and re-look at some of Hitchcock's work from like the 40s and the 50s, especially, you'll really get a feel for what, for what I'm talking about. Because, movies then were definitely made in color for the most part. And yet people like Hitchcock and Orson Welles in particular, they really stuck with black and white, because I think they realized that there was a power and sort of a not a weakness, but there was sort of a pathway that black and white could take them through that color was not going to be able to accomplish that same goal. So you're right about the yellow.
I'd like to interject a comment, if I may.
Absolutely.
On this point, I think you're exactly right about black and white films, and I have lately taken to looking at black and white films with the sound off,
right,
trying to scope out the lighting, and it can be absolutely fabulous.
Yep.
I just looked at Treasure of the Sierra Madre.
Ah, wonderful
picture with the sound off.
Right.
And The Hustler was another recent one. Yep. With Paul Newman. Absolutely fabulous black and white. The lighting is, you just can't, it's so complex you can't figure it out.
Yeah.
It's hard for a non-professional to be able to reverse engineer the lighting. It's so complex.
Yep. I agree. I think what you did is a great thing to do. I think people like Hitchcock and Orson Welles, they were so amazing because they looked at each scene in each one of their movies as if it was a photographic still picture. And that's how they framed the scene. And then they would go from there. But they first had an idea of what each frame would look like, which is why, in my opinion, their movies still today hold up against so many other films that have been made, because they just had the vision that a lot of other movie makers didn't have. Now, the most interesting question I've ever gotten about this chart is, if you grew up in a different part of the world, would you still associate these colors with the same emotions? And I had to answer, I can't answer that question because I've only grown up in the United States. It's very possible that if you grew up in a totally different culture in a different part of the world that associates different colors with different emotions than what you see on the screen, that this could be a completely different looking chart. So it was a great question that somebody had, and I really just don't, I just didn't have the answer, because I think you need to actually, be born into that culture to be able to answer that question. So, at my age now, it's a little too late to try and figure that out. Any other questions or comments about this before I move on?
I think there would be some similarities to other cultures.
Yeah, I agree.
Purple for royalty, white for purity, red for danger. I predate the American experiment.
Yeah, I agree. I think red in a lot of other cultures, though, has a lot of other meanings than that's not listed on this chart. But that's just, that was from me doing a little more reading. So, yep. Yeah, when I found this chart, it really opened up my eyes because, as I said, the original thing I was told was that color was a distraction, and that by removing the distraction, you removed something that could get in the way. But actually, when you start to realize that we associate these emotions with a variety of colors, it's a lot more than just a distraction, because you could be trying to create an image that actually is saying something, to the viewer, but because of the colors that you chose, you might actually be getting in your own way, so to speak. And I think I've got a couple of examples of that as we keep going. So great comments, great questions. All right, so now let's start. I'm going to start to show you some of my own work, first in color and then the black and white version. But what I'm going to say first is, when we each go out to do some photography, we either go by ourselves or we go with our friends. We call them rambles. You know, we just, you know, 3 or 4 of us pile into a car and we just pick an area to go to and whatever. And for the most part, the images that we come back with after we go out as a group are, in my opinion, generally not as strong as the images that I come back with when I just go out and do some work by myself. Because I think I'm concentrating more when I'm just on my own. But the other thing is, instead of just randomly looking for places of where there might be some emotion, you know, in the scene, I think that there are places you can actually pick to go to that are inherently more emotional, because more emotional things tend to happen at those places. And I think places like train stations and airports and bus stations are all ripe potential subject matter to come back with more emotion in your more emotional images. Because think about what happens in transit places. People are seeing each other for the first time in a long time, or they're parting and maybe they won't see each other for another 10 years. People are meeting people, strangers, maybe for the first time, you know, have a drink at the bar. So there are environments that are more emotionally charged. And if you go to those environments, you have a higher chance of coming back with some highly emotionally charged work. So I think everybody should give some thought to sort of where they like to go to create their photography. Now, a lot of this is pre-COVID, obviously. This is the Amtrak station in Baltimore, Penn Station. I'm only about 15 minutes from it. And when I go to Penn Station, I'm never disappointed with what I come back with, because first of all, I like the architecture of the station, although I'm not crazy about the color, which we'll get into that in a second. But I've usually have come back and you're going to see a variety of images that I've taken at the Amtrak station. So on this particular day, I go into the station, and my method is normally just to sit down on a bench and be a fly on the wall and just watch what's going on and see if I can pick something out that could become, you know, a worthy image. Well, right away on this particular day, I saw this young boy leaning up against his suitcase, and right away I got a flood of lots of different emotions. I got loneliness, abandonment, but I also was getting a feeling of maybe adventure, because maybe he's on his way somewhere, maybe he's on his way to college, but his expression and his body language was very much not that. His body language and his facial expressions were very much on the sadder side. So, but what is interfering with my translating those emotions as cleanly as I want to is all the different colors that are in this image. And also a little cropping was required, but as you're going to see, it really didn't take very much at all. But by simplifying the image and converting it to black and white, I've really drawn your attention now just to the boy. Because that's what I really want you to look at. The same way that Dorothea Lange wanted you to look at the young girl. I wanted to keep in the doors off to the right because they represent to me what the potential is. Is he waiting for someone to come through those doors, or is he going through those doors himself at some point, you know, when his train comes in? So I felt it important to keep those doors in. And I also loved the window light that was coming through the reflecting, you know, through the Venetian blinds. So by just cleaning the image up slightly and removing the distracting colors, it really makes the image so much more, you know, powerful. So we also have beautiful buildings, old buildings that have these great spiral staircases. This is the Peabody Library in Baltimore. And I was there one day, and we love shooting this spiral staircase because it's really a beauty. It's just gorgeous. It's all made out of wrought iron. It's handmade. It's really incredible. But what we're always hoping for, and what I'm always hoping for, is somebody walking down that staircase. Now there's an elevator there now, obviously, from the 4th floor to the bottom. So most people don't walk those stairs anymore. They just hop on the elevator. But this particular day, I was framing up the shot and I heard somebody's footsteps. And I said, maybe today is the day that I get lucky, that someone will actually walk down the 4 flights of stairs. And then I had a hope that whoever it was close enough to the railing so that he or she could be part of the picture. And luckily for me, it turns out to be this young woman. She is close enough to the railing. And the feeling I immediately got was that she was sort of like in a vortex or a maelstrom. I got a very confused sort of emotional feeling from this. But that very, very dark green really draws your eye away and also adds a potential emotion to the image that I didn't really want, to be there. And so again, by a simple conversion, I've really drawn your eye much more now to her. I used a slightly slower shutter speed because I wanted to show a little bit of motion. So I think I used 1/40th of a second, and you can kind of see that she is kind of leaning over, the post, and I did get a tiny bit of motion in the shot. So it was the only time I've ever been there that I've caught a person coming down, those stairs.
Why didn't you bring your own person?
Yeah, well, I could always do that, but I don't know. I don't have any models on my salary right now, on my payroll. So here I am again back at the Amtrak station. And I noticed this as soon as I walked in, because this is near the front entrance. And again, a total, wealth of emotion was flooding over me in terms of what's the story behind this gentleman? Is he homeless? Is he using the station just, to get, to grab a nap? Is he, did he stop in to grab a bite to eat? Does he work for one of the cleaning companies? There's a lot of possibilities, but what I loved was his expression, his posture, leaning up against the end of the bench, and his reflection in the actual bench. But again, although I liked all the architectural details, even the sign that said telephones and Amtrak police, that green tone in the back of this image was really very disturbing, and it didn't add anything at all to what I was trying to say. And by converting it to black and white, you really, again, draw the viewer's eye. Now the lines on the bench are just drawing you right to what I want you to see, which is the gentleman. And his reflection even pops a little more in black and white than it did in color. And I still kept in all of the architectural features. I love the sconces on the wall, and I still like, that sign. But it has receded into the background instead of it being in the forefront. And that's what I think is so amazing about good black and white, is that you can make that happen relatively easily. Because in this case, it really was just removing most of those colors and then working on the black and white conversion. That makes this, such a, to me anyway, such a powerful, image. Black and white is really good for abstract photography as well. I was at the Museum of Modern Art in New York years ago, passing from one gallery to another, and I turned to my left and I saw these things. Now we know what these things are. These things are water fountains. However, when I first took a quick glance, I didn't see water fountains. I saw two figures wearing some kind of dark skirts, and the reflections coming out of the basins, to me, they reminded me of like some sort of force field, like from a science fiction movie. But again, the conversion was so important because it enabled me to really darken down those skirts and to brighten up the reflections that are coming out of the bowls. And so to me, although this is certainly still two water fountains, it takes on a completely different life as an abstract photograph. And if you want to play with abstract photography, I would strongly recommend sticking with black and white, because then you really are going to be working just with shapes and forms and textures, and you won't have to worry about the colors, you know, sort of getting in the way. And I think creating abstract photography in color is, I think creating abstract photography, period, is difficult, but doing it in color is even more difficult. And so I was really happy with the way this, you know, this image came out, and it was just a lucky find. I just happened to be walking down the hallway. So a question I get a lot is, do I think in black and white and do I shoot in black and white? So I'll answer the second one first. No, I shoot everything in color. I don't think you should shoot in black and white, because although our cameras all have the ability to allow you to do that, the algorithmic engines that are built into your cameras are not nearly as strong as what's built into the software like Nik or Lightroom or Photoshop. So I think you should always shoot in color and do your black and white conversions after the fact. But do I think in black and white? The answer is yes, because when I looked at this shot through my viewfinder, I didn't like the color cast, and that was being caused by the day. The light of the day was just kind of strange. But I really liked the image. I loved the house sitting by itself, and that's no shack. That's a really nice mansion. And I liked the power lines going off to the left. And I even liked the storminess that was starting to develop in the sky. So when I looked at this and shot it as a color file, I was already thinking that. By darkening down the foreground, not so much that you can't see it, but kind of taking out the color cast, leaving the power poles bright enough so that you can see them, brightening up the house, and then playing with the storminess of the sky, I was able to create this black and white image, which was so much more powerful than the color version. So my advice would be to sometimes think in black and white, but I recommend sticking with shooting in color, because it gives you so much more flexibility when you decide what you want to do with the image. So this was
just a comment there.
Yeah.
Louis, are you shooting just JPEG or JPEG and RAW, or?
I'm shooting just RAW.
Just RAW. Well, you're going to see it in color to start with anyway, then, correct?
That's correct.
Okay.
Yep. Some people, I have some friends that shoot RAW color and JPEG black and white. I have some other friends that occasionally will switch over to monochrome, and just to see what an image would look like. At this point, with myself shooting black and white as long as I have, I don't really think I need to do that extra step. I kind of know what potential it has as a black and white conversion. And so I just rely on my doing the best I can with the color file as a RAW file, and then just doing the black and white conversion. But yeah, all of those are good possibilities.
Well, I mean, because I've noticed that even when I've set the camera to mono, and I go to process the RAW file, it's going to be in color anyway. So
right, exactly. Yep. So this is in the Hudson River Valley, by the way. So this is like upstate New York. Okay, let's talk about another quality of black and white, which we didn't talk about yet, which I think is one of the most important, and that's timelessness. And what do I mean by timelessness? It's kind of a vague concept in a way, but in a way, timelessness just means that there's nothing in particular in the image, whether it be this one or other ones that I show you, that make it easy to put a time of when the image was created. And that's the quality I call timelessness. And I think that's why Hitchcock shot in black and white for as long as he did, because he was able to create that feeling of timelessness by using black and white. It's really hard to, and Orson Welles was very good at that too. It's really hard to know sometimes what era they were even filming in, if not for the cars, you know, in the street and stuff like that. Now, this young girl, actually, this image I was able to get in a neighborhood pretty close to my house. And as soon as I saw the color file of this image, there were a variety of things that made me think that this should be a black and white file, and that the black and white would really emphasize the timelessness of the image. First of all, we have the young girl herself, which is just, she just has this haunted expression on her face. The dress she's wearing could have come out of Appalachia in 1940. Even some of the stuff on the porch, especially those two raccoons, those two stone raccoons off to the right, really had sort of a timeless quality. Now, there are some things on the porch that would belie, you could figure out to some degree when this was taken, right? That's a plastic flower pot behind her. If that was a ceramic flower pot, it would have actually helped. I would have rather it been ceramic. That watering can behind her is also, you can kind of date that to some degree. But to me, it didn't matter because the overall image is all about her for the most part. And again, by doing a black and white conversion, I've really emphasized the haunted look on her face, the cut of her hair, the look in her eyes, and of course that dress that she's wearing. And so now this looks like an image that could have come out of the 30s, the 40s, the 50s. It's really kind of hard to tell. And I think that's one of the other wonderful qualities about black and white. Whereas color, I think it's really hard to create timeless images in color. It's more difficult anyway, I think. And so if you're looking to create images that have a timeless quality to them, think black and white. Because I think I have a few others that also show you that same kind of thing. But you know, this girl has won me a lot of awards. This shot. For instance, I live very close to Lancaster.
Louis,
Yep.
I have a question. Do you play around with some of the film, I guess, filters that you can add to an image, like to make it look like it was plus X or tri-X, or I mean,
I have not yet done that, but I'm gonna.
That would add another dimension, I think. To
Absolutely, and as I'm going to mention a little later what programs I use to do my conversions, and I'm going to be getting more into that for one particular reason, which I'll touch on in a few minutes. So I live pretty close to Lancaster County, and of course there's a great, I'm sorry?
One other question. I got kicked out because I have a bad internet connection. Did you happen to say when the picture of that girl was taken?
This was taken about 7 years ago. Yeah, about 6 or 7 years ago. Yep.
Okay.
Yep. So again, I live pretty close to Lancaster County. I'm only about an hour away. There's a lot of Amish people that live in Lancaster County. There are certain events that take place in Amish country where the Amish are freely mixing with what they call us the English. So there are events, they're called mud sales. They're basically sales that are raising money for the volunteer fire departments. So there are these events where the English and the Amish are mixing. And at those events, I feel comfortable taking pictures of Amish people. Now that can set off a whole discussion, which I don't really want to get into right now, but everyone has to make their own ethical and moral line about taking pictures of, you know, certain ethnic groups or whatever. But what I like to do is we haven't had any mud sales lately because of COVID. Hopefully they'll be back again in next February. But what I like to do is I usually go with my like 100mm lens, and what I'm looking for are interesting faces, and I kind of then try to lock eye contact and then create the portrait. So I found this young boy. I loved his expression. they wear very simple clothes to begin with. So usually their jackets and their shirts have that timeless kind of quality. The only thing about this image that I wanted to change was the yellow orange of the hat, because although it's sort of timeless because that's what the color was for a long time, it draws your attention away from what I want it to be on. And what I want it to be on is just really the boy's face and his eyes. And by removing the color from the hat and turning this into a monochrome, I think it's much more successful now at what I'm trying to do, which is just to give you that locked in expression, you know, between this young boy and you as the viewer. And as I said before, our goal, I believe, is to have other people look at our work, and instead of just looking at an image for a second or two and then just going on to the next one, they sort of stick with it, and they keep looking at it because they keep trying to either figure something out, or there's just something about it that really holds their interest. And I think that's what I'm trying to do with my photography, is to really hold your interest, because the longer you stay, you know, with an image, the more you're going to get out of it. And again, as I said earlier on, the stronger your emotional connection is, you as the photographer, to the subject, that's what's going to create that interest in the viewer. There's a direct line that you can draw there. So black and white is also good for weather. You know, I consider night to be weather, but it's also good for fog and rain and mist and snow. It just lends itself to this. So here we are. I was born and raised in New York, so I'm a New Yorker. You know, when you were born and raised in New York, you're always a New Yorker. So I left when I was 17 and a half, but I can still consider myself a New Yorker. And my wife and I are very big fans of Art Deco. And so the Chrysler Building to us is like one of the Mecca buildings around the world. It's just, you know, it's an Art Deco classic. And we were at a rooftop bar, and I was able to finagle my tripod center pole to be above the security fence, because they don't want people falling off these rooftop bars, to get to a place where I could get this image. And I was satisfied with it, because I kind of liked the way that it was framed by these two other towers. There was no way that I was going to get it by itself. So I had to settle for a composition that I sort of liked, but I really didn't like the attention that the other colors of those other buildings draw you away from what I want you to look at, which is the Chrysler Building. And again, this is also cropped and changed a little bit, but by removing those odd color tones and making this purely about black and white, and therefore purely about the Chrysler Building, I think I'm successful in leading your attention much more to the Chrysler Building, and then you start paying attention to what's going on those other two buildings. The one on the left is actually a complete, you know, office building. The one on the right was actually still under construction. But my goal was to make the Chrysler Building the main, you know, the main feature, so to speak. It's just one of my favorite buildings. All right, another thing I started playing with when COVID hit was doing some macro work. I hadn't done macro work in a long time, but I used to love it. And I thought, no matter what happens, because I knew we weren't going to be traveling very far. In fact, you know, we weren't going to be traveling at all. And even how far we were going to be from the house was kind of questionable. But I said to myself, well, I can always do macro work in the house. I can just go to a grocery store and buy some flowers and, you know, and set up a little home studio, which is exactly what I did. And one of my favorite flowers is the calla lily, which is this flower right here, because I think they are the most elegant and the most sophisticated flower that I've ever shot. Now, right away, I knew that this was going to become a black and white shoot, because I wasn't getting a feeling of elegance and sophistication in the green that I wanted when I set, you know, the studio up to try and get these calla lilies. And as soon as I did the conversion with a jet black background and took the green out, now I'm getting the elegance and sophistication of the calla lily. It's totally lacking any of the other, you know, distractions that the original image had. And so for a while I played with the calla lilies, and first I tried my best to get as much of them in focus, you know, using focus stacking and high apertures and stuff like that. But then I realized that I'm missing an opportunity. And the opportunity was to once again look at abstract instead of just getting things tack sharp. So I started playing with creating abstract calla lilies, and I think I had more fun with the abstracts. So here I am, and I've just focused on that one area in the center, and I'm purposely letting the background fall out of focus, and it's sort of melding into the gray background. And I'm also playing with the background tonality by just playing with different, you know, adjustment brushes and things like that. So I'm also having a lot of fun creating more interesting, you know, background. So this was one of the abstracts. And here's like another abstract where you can see the, you know, the veins, I know that's not the right word, of the flower pretty clearly, but the edge has completely been lost, you know, to the land of the abstract. And I just sort of really liked the way that looked. So again, flowers are great, you know, and I would urge people, if you're looking for more abstract things to shoot, you know, flowers are always a good thing to think about. All right, I'm going to quickly run through, how are we doing on time? It's about 8. Okay. I'm going to just quickly run through a few images. These images, you're not going to see the color file. I said before that patience is required to be a photographer. So here I am on the east side of Manhattan, and I find this setting without the person. So I find the bridge, I find that's a deserted Con Edison power plant in the background. I find the lamppost on the left, those trees coming in on the right have sort of a scary, eerie feeling to them. But what I was missing was a person, because it really didn't hold together without a person. And if you notice, there's a staircase coming up from the left. And I knew that if I waited, and it was cold, that someone would eventually come up that staircase. And sure enough, you know, it's Manhattan, so it's pretty busy. So in about 10 minutes, this gentleman came up those stairs and walked toward me. And as soon as he walked toward me, I just started shooting. And I decided I would pick the one I liked the best later. And so this was the one that I picked later, and because I liked where he was. And of course, it was lucky for me because he was wearing all dark clothing, which is what I really wanted the person to be wearing. I wanted the person to sort of be dressed in black. So I could have always changed that, but he happened to be dressed in black. So patience is always really important. You know, here I am back at the Amtrak station again, but on this particular day, I went with a goal in mind. And I think that's another really important thing when you're a photographer and you go out to do some shooting, is to have some sort of goal. And my goal on this day was silhouettes and shadows. That's all I was going to shoot. And so I went into the Amtrak station. I sat down on a bench across from those doors that are letting in those beautiful columns of light. And I just sat and just waited, because I knew that people would cross through that column of light. And this one by far turned out to be the best one, because this woman walks through wearing this very fancy, you know, set of boots, and I caught her foot up in the air. So I caught it right in the right moment. You don't really see her at all, you know, so there's an air of mystery about that. You know, she's pulling a suitcase. Where is she going? Who is she going to meet? You know, so it sort of worked. And by making it very dark tone, and making it really about the shadows and the silhouettes, it really, really works. You don't need to see any of the details of a suitcase. There's nothing, you know, nothing that needs to be seen there. So have a goal in mind when you go out and shoot. Like after it snows, as I said, I love black and white with weather. And I used to live in farm country before I moved to Baltimore. And I know where these farms are. And so after it snows, I am immediately heading up 83, which is the highway that goes north of Baltimore, and I'm driving into Southern York County, and I'm looking for farms that I used to shoot all the time. And I love the fences on this particular farm. I love the way those two in the middle cross. And I love the fact that there's no detail in any of the fence. It's just really a graphic shot of fences in the snow. And I think black and white for graphic, as we've talked about already, for graphic shots are great. Here's a similar example, but I was able, in this case, to pull back a little further. And so I was able to use a wider angle lens, and I was able to get that beautiful curved wooden fence. And what I didn't notice until I looked at it on the computer was in the right-hand corner, about the third or fourth tree in, there's a bird that just happens to be in the picture. So it's always fun when you find something after the fact. I didn't put him there. He just happens to be there. So I love black and white for this kind of work. Now, these fences are exactly on the opposite side of the same farm where those other fences are, except this is where the horses are. Now, this one was taken this year. We actually got some snow this year, which was nice. Now, I really liked the fences and the horses and the trees in the background. But when I looked at the scene, it was imbalanced. And by that, I mean, imagine this scene that you're looking at right now without that one horse on the left, like cover him up with your hand or something. And what you actually get is an image that's too right heavy. It's almost like tilting too much to the right. I needed a horse to wander in and fill that field. And so once again, patience is required. And I just had to wait. And, you know, it only took 5 or 10 minutes. And that horse came over from the left-hand side, put his muzzle down in the snow to try and get some grass from underneath the snow, and pop, I got the shot. And now, to me, it's a much more balanced photograph. It just looks much more balanced with that one horse, you know, on the left. So again, patience. Always be patient. I've shot this tree for a little bit of over 15 years. So I try and get people to think of things like trees as living things, almost like people. I mean, I consider this tree to be sort of a good friend of mine because I've shot this tree so often. And I know one of these days I'm going to go back up to where this tree is and it won't be there. It'll, you know, it will have blown down in a storm, or maybe the farmer will sell the land to a developer. So while it's there, I'm going to keep shooting it, you know, 4 seasons a year. Because when I go to visit it, it's like visiting an old friend. It's like really, it's like seeing someone I haven't seen for a while. And I just love the way this tree splays out, the way the branches are just sort of splayed out. Just to me, it has a real heavy attraction. So I think it's a good thing to continually go back to the same place to shoot, because that's how you create those emotional connections with your subject matter. Because the more you get to know it, the more you'll get to, you know, to actually be emotionally connected to it. Here's just a, you know, an off-white barn door, barn side, very good for black and white. The only dark things in this are the nail studs. Notice in this case, the door is closed by that piece of wood. And then notice in this case, the door in this case is open. This one actually was muddy brown with a white door. And I really didn't like the muddy brown, but I knew that it could probably convert to like a charcoaly gray. And so when I shot it, I was already thinking, oh, you know, what tonality am I going to create the barn in? Because I didn't like the muddy brown. So for these kinds of simple graphic images, black and white is the way to go, because they just work. They just transmit the message just, you know, so clearly. Here's a farm in the snow. Actually, it snowed and then we had an ice storm. So the trees in the background are all full of ice. And I'm just using the cornfields to draw you into the farm scene. And notice that in the farm scene, all the shapes are very similar. All the rectangles, all the, they're all very similar. So I like that. That's what sort of attracted me to this scene. Here, I'm just trying to create a layered black and white landscape, meaning that there's not a lot of color in this image to begin with. The house is red brick, so that would have been red. But in general, I was just trying to create a layered looking winter landscape. And by using the vertical format and by just picking, a good vantage point, again, that's always important. I found a place where I could get up a little bit on a hill, and it let me shoot down onto the scene. And it created this really nice, winter landscape. This was the last one that I did this year. And here's where I'm going to mention that this is the only one that you've seen so far that I've actually converted in Nik Silver Effects Pro. Everything else was converted in Lightroom. The more that I learn about Nik Silver Effects Pro, the more that I'm going to become a Nik Silver Effects Pro user. It really is a better black and white conversion program than Lightroom. It's far more powerful. It's got far more presets to play with, including the film presets that one of you guys mentioned. Lightroom doesn't have that, but you can get that in Nik. So I think as I learn the program more, I will probably become more and more of a Nik user and less of a Lightroom user. Although the way they have it set up now, you can go from Lightroom, you can export a file from Lightroom into Nik, work on it, and then import it right back into Lightroom and continue to work on it. So you actually can use both programs simultaneously and use both of them to work on a conversion. But that's why I didn't want to answer that question about the film type. All right, I'm going to take a breath here. Any other questions at the moment? And how long should we take this time-wise? Because I know that you have a lot more to get to tonight. No answer? Hello?
Keep going.
All right, well, right now it's about 10 after 8. I just don't want to use up too much time. I'm certainly going to finish no later than 8:30 because I will be talked out by then anyway. All right, this is the Ansel Adams zone system. I'm sure most of you are familiar with it. This was more important to Ansel for printing than it was for actually capturing an image, because he felt that great black and whites had to have some element that fit into every one of these categories. I don't happen to agree with that, but that's how Ansel Adams felt. But the reason why I showed this to you is because what I want to show you right after this is this. And the reason why I want to show you this is because this shows you what these colors translate to in grayscale. And when I first started looking into color theory and converting to grayscale, this kind of surprised me because you can't, well, number one, you can't automatically think because I have a colorful picture in front of me that it's going to be a great black and white. Because notice that that hot pink in the far left, that's actually has more luminosity than the bright yellow, which kind of surprised me. And the deep blue actually has the least, and because that's almost like probably zone 8 or 9. So for the sake of this program, terms like brightness, luminosity, and tonality, they all mean the same thing. They all mean what's the quality of light that the color is reflecting. And so this is a chart that just shows you, in this case, how these 6 colors reflect. Now, for instance, Here's some row homes in Baltimore. We're famous for our row homes, and it's a very nice, colorful scene. It's got, I think, some nice color in the homes. I like the blue sky. So I'm already thinking this is going to convert nicely without doing much work to a nice black and white, you know, conversion. And look what happens. It's pretty flat. And the reason why it's flat is because the luminosity values of those various colors are actually pretty close to each other. Now, I could punch up the individual color channels and make it more contrasty, but that's not the point of my little demonstration here, because here's even a more graphic example. Here's some petunias, you know, on my back porch last summer, and I'm just shooting them and having some fun, but I'm already thinking, wow, these are going to make great black and whites, you know, the yellow and the pink and the green. You know, I'm already thinking black and white. And look what this one looks like in black and white. It's flat as a board. And that's because these three color channels really have very close luminosity values. So you cannot assume that because the scene in front of you is very colorful, that it's going to convert to a great black and white image, because that's just not the case. And again, you can always go in and change, you know, the color channels, but I just wanted to see what they looked like before I did anything. So it's just an example of getting fooled, so to speak, and doing your homework before you go out and do some shooting. All right, so now we'll do a few conversions. Now, let me make a comment first about post-processing in general. Post-processing, to me, should be a means to an end. And what do I mean by that? I mean that you should have an idea in your head as to where you want to take the picture before you bring it into any post-processing. The opposite of that is to have an image that you kind of like, you're not 100% sold on it, but you kind of like it. And you say to yourself, well, I'll just take it into Photoshop, or I'll take it into Lightroom, and I'm just going to play with all the different sliders, and I'm going to create a really wonderful picture. And 9 times out of 10, you're going to end up being disappointed. Because if the picture wasn't strong to begin with, in terms of the bones, you know, how the composition is actually constructed, no software is going to save it and make it a better picture. All you can do with software is make great pictures even better. And so that's why I say you should have a goalpost, you know, and also it makes your post-processing a hell of a lot quicker, you know, because you're not spending hours sort of playing with all the different sliders. So here's again an Amish girl taken at one of the mud sales, although I've shown this picture to people who thought this woman also looked like a Russian emigre, because she's got a very interesting expression on her face. And I liked the picture because I liked her expression, but I had problems with a couple of things. I had problems with the pink of her scarf, because to me, pink was like too modern a color. And I also had a problem with the tonality of her skin in general. It was just too dark. Now, to post-process a picture properly, and what I mean by that is, let's say someone wanted to buy one of your black and whites, but it started out as a color, you probably are going to end up spending over an hour, maybe in 2 or 3 different sessions, post-processing the picture so that it's looking just the way you want it to look. And I'm the same way. I probably go back to the same picture 4 or 5 times, 15 minutes per time, before I'm really satisfied. So that's the other reason why I can't really show a complete conversion, you know, in a presentation like this, because that's all it would be just showing you 1 or 2, you know, one or two conversions, and then we'd be out of time. But what I wanted to show you was some things relatively quickly, because my goalpost, my idea is I want to turn this, first of all, into a black and white. I want to definitely brighten up her skin tonality, and I want to do something with the pink scarf. So the first thing I do is I just convert to black and white. And Lightroom, when you convert to black and white, it still gives you control over all the color channels. There they are, the 8 color channels. But it also has this neat little tool up in the upper left-hand corner. If you click on that little tool, and then you click somewhere on the image, if you move your cursor up, whatever is in that tone gets brighter, and whatever, if you move your mouse down, whatever it is gets darker. And notice that this particular one, only the magenta slider is moving, because that scarf was pretty much pure magenta. So I could have done the same thing with just the magenta slider. But what about our skin tone? You know, that's going to be a little more complicated. So, but again, for the purpose of a program like tonight, I basically just, again, opened up that tool. I put the tool on the darker part of her skin right there, and I just started raising my cursor up a little bit until I got her skin to be a much more soft, sort of human color. And so this also needs contrast adjustment. This needs adjustment up here with her hair. But again, my goal in this program was just to show you some quick, down and dirty, you know, ways of making some conversions. Because to make a really careful conversion, it takes quite a bit of time. You know, it's kind of fun to take something that everybody sees in color and, for the hell of it, just change it into black and white. So we've got all these sunflower fields in Maryland that are wonderful. Who can't love this? It's absolutely gorgeous. And so I came back from a shoot up in northern Maryland and came back with these sunflowers. And, you know, I said to myself, I don't think I've ever converted a sunflower picture to black and white. So what I did was I just clicked black and white, and I went down to where I have the color channels, and I'm going to zero all these out. Come on. If you double click, of course, in Lightroom, it brings it back to 0. So that's now all the color channels as they actually came in. So right away, what I can do is I can take my blue slider and I can darken up the sky. I can take my yellow and orange sliders and I can make the flower, this big one right here, I can make it more glowy because it's got a really nice glow to it. And then with my green slider, I can either make the foliage darker or I can make it brighter. It really depends on what you're trying to do. And generally speaking, I usually like it when it's a little darker. And the last thing that I did with this is I didn't like the shadows that were in the middle of this sunflower, especially this deep one right here. So I basically just opened up a radial filter and I double click effect, which zeroes everything out. And I drew a radial filter. And I put it right there. And then I just took my shadows and pushed them all the way up and got rid of those deep shadows. And I also added just a tad of exposure. Notice, by the way, on this radial filter that I have this clicked on invert. If I didn't have this clicked to invert, everything I did would have happened outside of the circle. But when you have it clicked to invert, everything happens inside the circle. Some people use it for vignetting, and so they don't, I always have it checked. And so we kind of went from there to there, you know, in a few quick keystrokes. And I think it's, you know, it's nothing special. It's not the best picture I've ever taken, but it's showing something that we see all the time, or at least I do, because we have a lot of sunflower fields, in a completely different light. And that was enough to win me a placement in one of the competitions. One of the judges said, I've never seen a sunflower field done in black and white, and I really like it. So, right, you know, it got me a couple of kudos right there, just for doing it a little differently. So,
And I'm going to add that because the mood is a happy one, and it's so rare that we see black and white pictures and where the mood is actually joy.
that's a good point. Yep, that's a very good point. Let me just bring my toolbar up here so I know where I am. Yeah, you're right. And that is a very nice, cheerful black and white image. There's really nothing, even though it is black and white, there's nothing sad about this at all. It is a very happy, you know, image. Yep, that's a very good point.
Hey, Louis, this is Jeff. So
Yep.
For some reason, my system froze when you were asking about time, but you probably should start to wind it down.
Okay.
Done by 8:30.
Okay, very good. I'm just going to take one more. I'm going to do one more. I'm going to take this and just do a quick conversion. I know we've all been in this situation, which is that we go on a trip. This is somewhere out in Utah. And instead of having stormy weather, we have blah weather. And by blah weather, I mean blue skies, no clouds, you know, no redeeming features. And yet the feeling that I had as I was standing in front of this, you know, butte or mountain, whatever you want to call it, was one of awe. I just loved this, but the weather was just not cooperating. And so when I got home, when I looked at this one, I was so disappointed. And I said, you know, maybe there's a way that I can still make this a very, very dramatic looking image. It's not going to be anything like it looked, but maybe I can still create something very, very dramatic. So what I did was I converted it to black and white. And in this case, I used one of the presets. If you click on those 4 boxes, you're going to pull up the presets that Lightroom has. And this is where Nick has it over Lightroom by a lot because they have like 70 presets. And I'll pick number 7 and then I'll pick close. So right away, I'm already liking the fact that it's looking far more dramatic, although it totally looks completely different from what it looked like. And I remembered that I still have control over all the color channels. And so I took my blue and I turned it into a jet black sky. And I didn't like the way this log or rock was sticking out. So even though Lightroom isn't the best thing for cloning, I saw if I could maybe clone it out. And so I clicked on it. Lightroom is going to pick a spot. If you don't like the spot that Lightroom picks, you can just wait for the hand to come up and actually just move. I kind of like it more natural looking. So let's say I left it there. So I got rid of that disturbing element. This to me looks sort of natural. And now I've got this little dark, you know, this darker place that has a lot of shadow. And so what I did was I opened up my adjustment brush and I double clicked effect to make sure everything was zeroed out. And I opened up my shadows and I opened up my exposure. And then I just started painting. That's a little too bright, so you can see I definitely made some mistakes. I should be doing this with a stylus instead of with a mouse. I'll just bring that slightly down a little bit. So the bottom line is, in a couple of quick keystrokes, I took an image that I thought still looked really blah, and I've now turned it into something that at least looks very dramatic. And when I print this, you know, as a black and white 16 by 20 print, it's really very, very impressive. So I want to thank you again for your time and your attention and your great questions. And Jeff, if anyone else has any last question, please go ahead. And if not, we can say goodnight.
Louis, that was awesome. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your attentiveness and for your great questions. Okay. Well,
Nothing, yes, thank you very much, Louis. It was fantastic.
okay. Well, you guys take care, and please fill out my survey, and the Word document does recap exactly what we went through tonight. So if you wanted to have a handy little cheat sheet of what we talked about and what I showed you tonight, you'll have that when Jeff distributes that to everybody.
Okay.
Thank
Okay.
you.
You guys
Thank
take care. Be well.
Great.
Take
Thank
care.
you.
Great.